Hey guys, so today we're going to be going through the primaries that were held last night in the states of Alaska and Wyoming, and these are two Republican states. I mean, we aren't expecting much from the numbers here, and it pretty much just shows what you might expect, especially from a very conservative state such as Wyoming, but there is a contested race in the gubernatorial side for Alaska, but there is no Senate race there, and the Senate race for Wyoming, and the gubernatorial race, I don't believe there is one for Wyoming. We can check in just a second. Actually, there is, but it's already rated safe Republican, so it isn't of utmost importance. But for the governor's race in Alaska, it's actually very, very important because this race is considered a toss-up race because there's an incumbent independent governor, and he is going for re-election, but against a Democrat and a Republican. So if this was just an independent versus a Republican, I think that this race could lean a different way. But now that there's going to be a lot of vote splitting, and actually neither candidate has reached nearing 40% in three-way polling, it shows this race actually could become very contested. But enough talking about that. Let's go through what we saw actually last night. So on the governor's side, the Democratic Party, we have Mark Begich, and he is a former senator. He was elected 2008 and then ran for re-election 2014 and then lost. And pretty much he was mildly popular, but also it was a Republican wave year, but he also lost by a very narrow margin. It wasn't some huge blowout as you might expect, especially since there were other incumbents like in Arkansas, which completely lost their Senate race by over 10%, even though they were the incumbent Democrats. So Alaska is actually that one state that held out for the Democrats. Even though they lost, it was a very narrow margin compared to where it could have been, because keep in mind, this is Alaska. This is not the same type of Republican state you might expect. If they have a Republican wave year, I mean, think about it. It was 2014. The Republicans were on the way to take back the United States Senate, and they did so, winning 54 seats to the Democrats' 44. Overall, that map looked very good. Obviously, there were two independents, so I know someone's going to say something about that. But overall, the map looked very good for the GOP. I guess the GOP did very well in a number of these key Democratic toss-up seats that were in Republican areas, like we're seeing now in 2018. Just 2018 is a Democratic wave year. So if we look at the map, then obviously the Democrats are going to do better in terms of the Senate races, because even though they are in states like North Dakota and Montana, those races may not flip red, only because this is a Democratic wave year and it's against the incumbent party. But this was 2014. Obama was in power, unpopular, Republicans leading in the generic ballot. And then we go into it, and then in other races, the Republicans, I mean, it was a blowout. They won, some of them by poll closing time, defeating an incumbent Democrat. But in Alaska, it took a while. And this was the incumbent senator, so he's going for the governorship, and that's something that really could help him. I mean, his name recognition is already known statewide, so he's going to have an upper hand against a couple other candidates might. However, there's an incumbent governor, of course, who would be known statewide, and then Mike Dunleavy, who isn't as known of either two of the candidates, however, still a Republican and still a Republican state. So we had the Democratic primary being uncontested, 63,000 votes on the Republican side, and we have 36,000 on the Democratic side. So again, something you would expect from a Republican state to have more Republican voters for obvious reasons. Nothing really different than what you might expect. I can't compare it to 2016 because in both states, even Wyoming and Alaska, both had a caucus, so there aren't exact numbers there. But Mike Dunleavy won the primary, and that was something that was expected. And if we look at the polling numbers, they're actually pretty accurate. So if we go over to the Republican primary, let's scroll down. Here are the three candidates: Bill Walker, the independent; Mike Dunleavy, the Republican; and Mark Begich, the Democrat. So let's go ahead and scroll down. And the only poll taken was taken by Dunleavy for Alaska. However, it still showed him winning by a very considerable amount, and that's exactly what happened. He defeated Meet Treadwell, who was a former lieutenant governor, which I actually thought would have a very great chance at winning this race, but didn't. I just assumed that he would be known statewide. I mean, a lieutenant governor, even though it's like, I guess not as known as a governor. I mean, if you're in a statewide office, especially in a state like Alaska, it seems like you could be known statewide. But overall, Mike Dunleavy won the Republican primary with 39,000 votes. So, and on the U.S. at-large district, this race actually, some people think, could get a little bit closer. This is not a rated safe district for the Republicans. There actually is a shot where the Democrats could actually win in the U.S. House district at large, which is pretty surprising. But also, when we look at the year that it is, it seems like it could be possible. But looking at these primary numbers, I think this just solidifies that this is a Republican seat, but isn't too solidly of a Republican seat, considering that if we look at states, Republican states in general, if there is a Democratic candidate that people are likely to vote for, they're not going to switch to the Democratic Party just to vote in a primary. That's not something people do. Also, in states like Tennessee, a lot of people like to point out primary turnout, and I get that. But the only areas where primary turnout matters are in swing states or in Republican states where there are more Democratic voters. For example, West Virginia or Wisconsin, who went for Trump in 2016 and had more Republicans in 2016 vote in the primaries, and now has 100,000 more Democrats in the primaries. Same thing in states like Michigan or haven't talked much about Pennsylvania, and we're going to see the numbers down in Florida later on in this month. So those are the races that primary turnout does matter in, but Alaska is already a Republican state, or states like Tennessee, or nobody's going to look at Mississippi unless something is, abnormal, where there's more Democratic votes in a district that has a Republican incumbent. That's something to point out. But again, Alaska, don't expect much for the Democrats in either of these races, considering that there is going to be vote splitting on the governorship, the gubernatorial election between the Democrat and Independent, and the Republican will likely just get a plurality and win that election. But we also have Wyoming results. I think all of you have known the whole running joke about Wyoming being safe blue, but oh well, we're looking at this, and we see 114,000 votes on the Republican side, and then I believe it was 17,000. We're going to find out in just a second. Yeah, 17,000 votes on the Democratic side. Mary Throne, she was actually, I put her as a Senate candidate a long time ago when I first made my first ever Senate prediction in 2017, early 2017, compared to where we are now. And it ended up being Gary Trauner, and then we go down the governorship. She did choose to run for that. And then on the Republican side, here's what's actually interesting. So nothing new from the Senate elections. There wasn't that contested of a race. He's an incumbent. He won 64%. So he's already rated safe for this Senate election. The gubernatorial election is also rated safe, but it also comes down to the candidates themselves. Foster Friess, who is a Trump-endorsed candidate, lost the Republican primary here. It wasn't by a huge blowout, so it wasn't some type of, oh, you're endorsed by Trump, we're not voting for you. However, when it came down to it, if we look at the candidates, Foster Friess was endorsed by Donald Trump and a number of notable figures. We have Rick Santorum, Rand Paul, Charlie Kirk, Donald Trump Jr., and when it comes down to it, we look at Mark Gordon's endorsements, and we don't see that much. We have a state auditor, a former Secretary of State, and former U.S. Senator. So nobody currently in office. The state legislatures easily flocked to Mark Gordon, but it's because he's the Wyoming state treasurer, and Foster Friess is a businessman. Exactly what Donald Trump was in 2016, and then the Donald Trump candidate did not win. So even though this is Wyoming, this is not showing some blue wave type effect. Wyoming is a Republican state. It will be a Republican state for many years to come. It will be a Republican state in terms of the Senate and the gubernatorial election, so don't expect much. All I'm just pointing out is that the Trump candidate did lose here, which could show a little bit more of a swing in these key conservative areas where Donald Trump may not be doing too well in terms of endorsing candidates. I don't think Trump would lose the state whatsoever. It just shows that maybe the Republican mindset here is a little bit different from where it was 2 years ago. So overall, if you look at the gubernatorial elections, again, the Trump endorsed candidate actually did not win, and polling wasn't exactly incorrect either. It was a narrow victory for Mark Gordon, the most recent poll, and it showed Mark Gordon winning over Foster Friess, who came in second, and then Harriet Hagman came in third. And if we look at this, that's exactly what happened here. Mark Gordon won with 33%, Foster Friess 25.5%, and Harriet Hagman with 21.4%. So overall, Mark Gordon will be the nominee for the gubernatorial election, and again, not much to see in terms of the Senate election. If we look at the 2016 presidential election results, do not expect much for the Democrats here whatsoever. Hillary Clinton got a mere 21%, and surprisingly, Clinton actually won a county, which is very interesting, but this is a state that overwhelmingly went for the president. 67% of voters went for Trump in 2016, and only 21% went for Hillary Clinton. So overall, the Senate election, don't expect much for the Democrats. The gubernatorial election, do not expect much for the Democrats. Overall, these primary numbers look very good for Republicans because nothing is not very good as in like, oh, life-changing, anything. Just the numbers look solid for a Republican state. These two Republican states, you shouldn't expect anything different. And in the cases of Alaska's gubernatorial match, it doesn't look like this race could be too lenient towards the Democrats or the independents, because the Republicans will likely get a plurality just based off vote splitting. So thank you guys for watching this video. Comment down suggestions below, and I'll see you all tomorrow.